Good evening everyone and welcome to our Monday Night Live. I'm Tanja from Tanja Horsemanship, and tonight we're going to be talking about changes in our horse's behaviour, why it happens and how we can help. So as per usual, we'll give it a couple of minutes for everyone to get settled in and start logging on, because obviously it takes Facebook a little while to let everyone know that we're live. So please let me know when you're here by clicking the thumbs up or making a comment, and so I can see that people are starting to come on. Now's a really good opportunity to share with your friends, so go ahead. I think should be a share button, or there's some kind of button that Facebook gives you that says that you can tell people that we're live at the moment. So if you know anyone who might be interested in this topic of behaviour, go ahead. Hey Gwenda, go ahead and hit that share button or invite button, whatever it may be that Facebook's given you, and we'll just give it a couple of minutes and wait for everyone to start rolling in. So if you're waiting, go ahead and grab a pen and a piece of paper if you're a note taker. I know that I am, and as always there's going to be an information sheet available on tonight's topic at the end, so be sure to send me your email address for that. I know that a lot of you last week and over the last couple of weeks, I can see the thumbs starting to come up. That's great, thank you. Hey Lisa, I know that a few of you have just been writing in the comments that you would like an information sheet. Hey Beth, and hello Hillary. What I need you to do is actually send me a private message, because there's so many comments that come through during the live feed, and sometimes Facebook it filters them in some way or whatever. So hey Abby, so sometimes I don't actually get to see all of the comments, and I'd hate for you to miss out on an information sheet. So if you do want one, then go ahead and send me a private message at the end of the live, and it's via the private messages that I actually make sure that I'm ticking all the boxes and sending everyone the information sheets. So I can see that there's quite a few people starting to check in and arrive, and I really appreciate that. Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for spending your Monday night with me. And as I said earlier, tonight's show is about changes in our horse's behaviour, what some of the reasons are for those changes in behaviour, and what we can do about it. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is probably 8 of the most common reasons. Hi Amy. What I'm going to talk about tonight is probably 8 of the most common reasons that our horses change our behaviour, and there are a lot of reasons that horses' behaviour can change, but what I want to talk about is probably the most common reasons that I see personally, and how we can address those issues. So I can see that everyone's sort of starting to arrive now, so that's fantastic. We'll go ahead and get on with the show. So those of you who are just starting to check in now, go ahead and hit that invite button or that share button for anyone that you might know that might be interested. Hey Karen, in tonight's talk. Hey Tanja, thank you all for being here with me. So I'm going to start with the most common reason that your horses will change its behaviour, and understand that most of these reasons are actually going to overlap, or a lot of the things are going to overlap, no matter what we're talking about. So when I was writing, hey Grace, when I was writing the talk for tonight, when I was writing my notes for tonight, what I noticed was that a lot of the notes that I'm going to share with you tonight are notes that I've used, or reasons that I've used in the past for building confidence and things like that. Behavioural issues, obviously that's what we're talking about tonight, but you know, confidence issues and things like that can all, you know, all of these issues tend to overlap with our horses. So what I'm going to do, the first one is diet. So most of us are aware that whatever we put into our horse's body is something that needs to be processed, and it's something that every horse is going to be different. So some horses can be intolerant to some feeds. So when I was in my 20s, I had a thoroughbred, and I started feeding him wheat and chaff of all things, and I'm not saying not to feed wheat and chaff, because I feed my horses wheat and chaff at the moment. But when I first changed to wheat and chaff, I noticed that the horse actually broke out in hives all over his body. He had all these welts all over his body. So it turned out that he had an intolerance to wheat. So not only did he have welts all over his body, but he became very difficult to ride and handle during the couple of weeks that it took me to figure out that it was actually the feed doing it to him. So sometimes our horses can have an intolerance to feed, just the same as we can. New feed can be something that we've introduced to our horses. So we might have been told, hey, oats are really great for our horses, so go ahead and feed horses oats. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that oats are not a good feed. I actually feed oats myself, and a lot of people sort of say, oh, oats are what you feed racehorses and all that sort of stuff. I would disagree with that, and I don't want to spend too much time on going in deep for this particular topic, because what I want you guys to have is a list of basically what we're going to talk about tonight, which is 8 things. I want you to be able to look at that list and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm going to be able to look at that. Have I changed my horse's diet? Have we had a change in the season? Have I put him in a new paddock? Sometimes we change paddocks without thinking there's probably a different pasture in that paddock. Maybe there's different browsing in that paddock, which means there might be different trees or shrubs or barks or things like that that he's going to be, munching on. So new feed, intolerance to new feed, new pasture by moving the paddock or just simply by a change in season. Hey, Kerry. Hey, Michael. Any additives. So sometimes we might not think of an additive as being a new feed. We might feed herbs, or we might feed supplements, or someone might have said, hey, this is really good for the coat to be shiny, or this is really good for calming, or this is really good for their hooves, or whatever it may be. So these are all things that can contribute to the change in our horse's behavior. The last thing that I'm going to talk about in regards to diet, or the causes of behavioral problems when it comes to diet, is maintaining a feed level when we're, hi Sandra, when we're maintaining a feed level but we're reducing a workload. So some of us might have been riding our horses every day and we've been feeding them at a particular level, and we all of a sudden are not able to ride or work our horses every day, so the work level drops off and the feed level remains the same. So when that happens, obviously we're giving our horses excess energy, and they have to deal with that excess energy, and they have to, sometimes that can come out in a behavioral problem. It's something really important, and it's definitely something that I notice in my own horses a lot. If I reduce the workload in my own horses, then, and that can be as simple as changing a paddock, which I'm going to refer to again shortly in under another heading. If you're taking your horses out of a 10-acre paddock and you're putting them in a 1-acre paddock, you're basically reducing their workload. Hey Jess, you're reducing their workload, the amount of area that they have to travel each day, and you're maintaining the feed that you've been giving them. So as a guideline, Brumbies or wild horses, they've put trackers on wild horses and discovered that they will travel up to 20 kilometers per day seeking food and water, and those horses were healthy, they were fat, so to speak, or in good condition. They traveled that far and they were just eating grass. So, hey Lisa, so we have to realize that whilst we, go into the food store and we see all these nice shiny bags of feed, and I'm just as bad, I go in, I say, oh, what's in that? That's a new one, what's that going to do for my horse? We're adding all this extra stuff into our horse's diet, whereas they're an animal that is designed to eat grass and travel long distances, and be able to travel long distances on grass and grass alone. So that is something that we really need to consider, and I know that it's something that a lot of people are in denial about. I've spoken to a lot of people who come to courses with their horses that have got behavioural issues, and the horses will be in tip-top, royal show condition. You could take them into a royal show tomorrow, and I'll say, what do you feed? And I go, it's not feed. No, no, it's not the feed. So it can be a really delicate issue, but it is something that we really need to think about, because they are, I've got horses sitting on a 45-acre paddock, and they're fat. I could probably give them a bath and take them into a show tomorrow, and they do pretty well, and they get absolutely nothing. They haven't been fed. I've got horses out there that haven't been fed for 6 months. And they're doing just fine on just grass alone, because that's what they're designed to do. So that's something that we have to fundamentally understand, what our horses are designed to eat. So the solution to all of these issues are obviously going back to the feed that you know that has worked. So if you've got a horse that you've had for a long time, then and you've known that a particular feed has worked, and for some reason you've changed it. I know that I do. Someone will recommend something to me and I'll say, okay, well, I'll give that a go. If it's not broken, don't fix it. And I know that it's really tempting, because feed companies are always bringing out new products, and we're always talking at shows or clinics and things like that, and people say, oh, I'm having great success with this, and it gets really tempting to want to add that into the feed, or add that to their feed. So if you find that your horse has got like a change in behavior, then definitely I'll go back to the feed that was working. So Gwenda's just put minerals ? So yes, obviously any kind of mineral supplement, anything that you're putting in that horse's mouth, if you see a change of behavior that could be related to that addition, then that is something that you need to investigate. So, you know, I feed my horses minerals, I feed my horses herbs, I feed my horses oats, I feed my horses lucerne chaff, I feed my horses oaten. You know, I'm not going to sit here and say that any particular feed is something that you should not feed. And I think that we do need to supplement in regards to the way that we keep our horses these days, because they're not able to forage and browse for, you know, 100 acres or 200 acres or 300 acres. So I'm not going to pinpoint any particular feed and say don't feed it, but what I am going to say is that, you know, if you've noticed a sudden or a recent change in behavior, or even a change in behavior that's sort of been around for 3 or 6 months, and you're going, I don't know what, you know, why is he behaving this way? Then maybe you need to look at the feed. Maybe as we're coming into winter, you know, we've had a pretty good season. I know my horses are all fat as fools. We're coming into winter. Maybe we've started rugging them so they're not using the food for warmth. Maybe we've started to supplement their food because we're going, it's winter, it's cold, they need more food. And maybe that's just a simple reason for the behavioural problems to set in. So all I'm saying is that diet can be a quite significant aspect in regards to any behavioural issues that you might be experiencing. I also like to change my feed as per the workload and the day. So I know that us personally here at home, there's 3 of us that can be feeding at any given feeding time, and we feed 2 or 3 times a day. And so I know that when you're feeding 2 or 3 times a day and there's 2 or 3 people feeding, that it can be really easy to have a standard feed. They get 1 scoop of this, 2 scoops of this, 3 scoops of that, whatever it is. And they get the same feed all the time. Well, if I am going to a clinic and I'm not taking a particular horse, and that horse sits in the paddock for 3 or 4 days and gets that same feed for 3 or 4 days, they're being fed at an optimum level or an athlete level, but that workload isn't happening because I'm not here. So that's something that we need to consider. We're guilty of it because obviously at home it's a lot easier to have one standard feed that everybody knows exactly the numbers of scoops and all of that sort of thing. But it can introduce a set of issues than putting a piece of paper or a whiteboard or something in the feed shed and saying, on non-work days do this, on work days do this, X, Y, Z. Let me see, Kathy, what about a change of behaviour through a sudden growth of feed in the paddock? Absolutely. So pasture is definitely something that you need to consider. So, you know, depending on the season or depending on whether you've rested a paddock and you've gone ahead and popped them into a paddock, sometimes it could be as simple as just waiting for them to become accustomed to that pasture. You may need to increase the workload and reduce the supplemented feed that you're giving them while they start to acclimatize to that new feed. So if I'm taking a horse out of a paddock that they've been grazing on for quite some time and I go ahead and put them into a really lush paddock, one, I'm of course going to be worried, depending on my horse, about founder. So that's something I need to consider myself, just because there's sugars in the grasses and things like that. But even if you weren't worried about founder, then a behavioural issue, you know, taking them off quite a empty paddock and putting them into quite a lush paddock is going to cause a spike in sugars, and that is going to be helped by either increasing their workload, restricting their access to that grass, or simply waiting it out. You know, maybe 1 or 2 weeks, and their metabolism's going to adjust to the feed that they're now on, so to speak. So the second thing that I'm going to talk about tonight in regards to changes in behaviour is exercise. So obviously this goes hand in hand with diet, because energy input, which is feed is energy, and I think it's really important for everyone to start thinking about feed being energy. Energy input should be equal to energy output. So if you're feeding the feeding the buggery out of your horse, and you're giving him all these really cool additives, and you're riding him just on the weekends, and he's in a fairly small paddock, then more than likely you're going to be experiencing some kind of behavioural issues, because he's basically like a kid that's full of lollies. You know, he's got all this sugar, he's got all this energy, he doesn't know what to do with it. Oftentimes an older horse is going to be able to manage that energy and reduce, but a younger horse is just not going to know how to deal with that excess energy. And that's where you're going to start seeing behavioural issues like pacing the fences, or destruction of rugs, or picking on other horses. Any of these kind of behavioural issues are going to start to happen when the horse has got access to too much energy. So, as I said earlier, they're meant to travel 20 kilometres a day on grass, and so I feel that most pleasure riders, so people that are just riding on the weekends, or hey Nav, happy birthday, I feel like anyone who's just riding on the weekends for pleasure, or maybe riding 2 or 3 times a week, you really aren't using that much energy in your horse, even though we feel that we are. So I talk to a lot of people, and they'll say, oh, I rode him for an hour and I popped him in the paddock. An hour's nothing to a horse, really, depending on the workload that you're doing, but most, on a generalistic scale, most people, an hour's work is water off a duck's back when it comes to a horse, and yet we're giving them all these supplements and all these excess energy or excess feed, because we think that we're using it up, and we're really not. Small paddocks. So exercise is something that we consider of us working the horse, so us going for a ride, or us lunging, or whatever, and it's often not something that we consider when it comes to paddock size. But I notice a huge difference when my house paddock is probably only about 2 acres, it might be even a little bit smaller. When my horses are in my house yard paddock, they are noticeably higher in energy, higher in alertness than when they're across the road in their 45 acres and they're traveling 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, 10 kilometers a day, because they're walking to the dam, and then they're walking to their favorite tree where they like to have a sleep, and then they're walking down the back to get the good grass, and they're meandering all over that paddock. And so I know that they're covering quite a significant amount of ground. But the horses in the backyard don't even have, the water's right there. I feed them right next to the water. Once they've done 1 or 2 laps of the paddock, they know that the grass, there's not much grass in there. So they really have no need to move. And that's something that we really need to take into consideration when we're talking about exercise, is actually the size of our horse's paddock and how many miles they're actually covering each day as incidental exercise, if you'd like to call it that. Stimulation is something else that needs to be considered under the exercise umbrella. So behavioural issues can happen when our horse is understimulated. So if you're typically riding your horse regularly or often, or you're you've got them in a nice big paddock. I certainly know that when my horses are on their 45 acres, they've got a lot of stimulation there. So they've got little creeks to cross over, they've got little hills to go up and down, they've got different patches of grass to go to, they've got different areas to investigate, and they've got a lot of ground to cover, and there's probably a lot happening. You know, there's cars driving past and the neighbours' horses come up, and then at the other end of the paddock there might be workmen across the road and things like that. So they've got a constant stimulus, they've got a constant investigation happening, they've got a constant motion happening. When they're in the backyard, so there's not a lot of visual stimulation externally. You know, there's a couple of cows in the paddock next door, but there's not really a lot for them to do. So again, that is the time and place when you start to see behavioural issues happen. They might start pacing up and down the fences, they might start wind sucking, they might start forcing or picking on the other horses to try and get them to play, destroying rugs, all that kind of stuff can happen from a lack of stimulation. So that's something that we need to consider when it comes under the exercise banner. So the solutions for all of those problems that I've just spoken about is exercise, obviously, stimulation in terms of if you are going to work every day and you're unable to work the horses, or you only get a small amount of time to work them and they are in small paddocks, go ahead and get them some slow feeders, get them some jolly balls or whatever they are with the holes in them where the food sort of comes out of them. Anything like that is going to help the horses actually take a bit of time to eat their food. And there's going to be a stimulation in that, because they're sort of having to move the hay net around and find the hole where the food comes out and all that sort of stuff. Herd is really important, which I'm about to talk about that in greater detail in a minute, but putting them in with another horse is another form of stimulation, so they can go ahead and play with each other and run around and mutual groom and all that sort of thing. And a reduction in feed is something that we need to consider. So even though you might have them in a small paddock where you're thinking, I can't reduce the feed because they've got hardly any grass in here, you might need to consider the type of feed. So you might need to go ahead and go grab them some, you know, oaten hay or Rhodes grass hay or grassy hay or pea hay, or, you know, whatever you've got available to you in your area and in your country. I know I have people watching from overseas. Get them a lower quality hay, but one that is, you can give them a lot more of. You're better off giving a lot of low quality hay than a small amount of concentrated high sugar hay, because they're going to be finished that in half an hour and then they've got the rest of the day to stand in the paddock and twiddle their thumbs, so to speak. So the third thing that I want to talk about in regards to changes of behaviour is a change in the herd. So changes in the herd can really affect horses. I did know of one instance comes to mind of a little horse that I was called out to help a lady. She was having a lot of behavioural issues with him. He was picking on the horses in the herd, and he was only a young horse. He was only probably 4 or 5 at the time, and he was a gelding. So he shouldn't have been the leader of the herd, but he had found himself in the position of being the leader. So what happened was this particular horse became the leader because he was a bossy little britches, but then he didn't know what to do with the leadership. So it actually gave him an extreme lack of confidence, and it caused a lot of behavioural issues in him. So when I went to the lady and we sat down and we talked about what had occurred, what had actually happened was in the preceding, I think it was within the 3 months preceding that, the matriarchal mare of that herd had actually passed away. So all of his life, this little horse, or all of his life with her, in this particular herd, he'd known a herd with a matriarchal mare and then 2 IC and then him and then a couple of other horses, and all of a sudden the leader of the herd was gone. She was dead. So he had to he didn't have to, but what happens is with a young horse especially, he's going to start challenging this horse and challenging that horse and playing and picking and doing all that kind of stuff. So what happened with him is he found himself as the leader of the herd because the other horses were sort of old enough that they didn't want anything to do with him, and they were mares, so they didn't want to play and they didn't want to challenge him and all the rest of it. So he found himself at the top, which actually gave him a huge lack of confidence. He didn't know what to do with his newfound power, if you like, because the leader of the herd has a lot of responsibility. Even in our herds at home, we think, oh, I'm feeding them, I'm giving them the water, I'm keeping them safe. The leader of the herd doesn't really have an integral role. We know that theoretically as human beings, but horses don't know that. All they've got to go on is instinct. And their instinct is that the leader of the herd is responsible for food, water, keeping us safe, keeping an eye out, all the rest of it. So a 4-year-old horse has no business being the leader of the herd, but that's where he found himself, and it caused him all sorts of anxieties, which caused him a lack of confidence, and through that lack of confidence he ended up having a lot of behavioural issues. So as we started working with him, he found his place in the herd and he allowed the 2IC to take over, and all was well within the herd. So a loss of a horse, putting new horses in the herd can ruffle the feathers a bit and change things up a little bit, and can cause changes in behaviour. Adding new horses, as I just said, but if one of those new horses becomes a new boss, that can throw a spanner in the works as well. And a change to where your horse is alone, that can cause a significant change as well. So I run all of my horses in herds, but every now and then my horses might have to spend alone time. So if we travel away to a clinic and I've only taken one horse, then they might be alone in the stables. And as it so happens, I've got one out the back in the house yard at the moment who is alone. She does have a horse across the fence. They can touch nose to nose. It's not the same. Your horses who can touch nose to nose, they can't mutually groom properly. There is a barrier there. They can't wander off and graze together. Again, I don't want to go in depth into that particular subject because that would be a video all on its own. But I can see, I've been riding her the last few days, and I can see a significant change in her behavior, because I know that because she's on her own, she's not sleeping properly, she's not grazing properly because she doesn't want to go too far away from the other horse, and she's just generally unsettled because she feels quite unsafe in that paddock. So I'm smiling because I'm thinking, everyone's thinking, oh my God, why are you leaving her like that? She's getting another horse in there with her tomorrow. It was just a set of circumstances that found her alone. And I wanted to mention it because it is significant when it comes to changes of behavior. If you've got a horse that finds itself suddenly alone, this could be a really big cause of changes of behavior. So that's changes in herd. That was number 3. So number 4 brings me to mares. And obviously mares, we need to touch base on this. Mares are going to come in and out of season. So often, you know, it's a running joke. Oh, you know, it's just a mare, she's temperamental. Instinct tells your mare that when she comes into season, she should be breeding, she should be carrying on the existence of the herd, etc., etc. So that is going to cause some significant changes in behavior, because her focus is going to be on one thing and one thing only, and that's finding an appropriate stallion to breed with. So in terms of solutions, sorry, I didn't talk about solutions about the herd. Obviously, solutions is waiting for the herd to settle back down again in regards to adding a new horse, getting your horse in with another herd to help them settle down. If they find themselves alone, put your horses with other horses if they're alone, because that's going to help them settle down as well in terms of changes of behavior. If there has been a loss in the paddock, they will, hopefully most of the time the herd will settle, but we had to intervene with the little horse, and all we did was start giving him some external stimulus. So we started doing my ground exercises program with him, and that was reflected in the paddock. Amy's talking, I put Maxie out in a small herd for a few days and the changes in her are huge, thanks. So Amy was a lady that I was speaking to in Warhope, and she had her horse nose to nose so the horse was able to see lots of other horses, but wasn't actually in with a herd, and she's just saying that the changes are significant. So it is a really vital part of a horse's life, is to be actually in with a herd within the same paddock. So mares coming in and out of season, there isn't a lot you can do about it. There are products on the market that claim to be able to help you. I haven't experienced personally any help in regards to supplements, so I can't comment on that, but they're certainly there and they're certainly available, and I think that they would be worth a try. I always say that with most supplements or most solutions in regards to anything, it's like Queensland itch. I've got, you know, 2 horses that are particular, you know, Itch Magic works on. I've got 1 horse that MTG works on. I've got 1 horse that herbs work on. Every horse is different. Every solution is going to work differently on each horse. So just because you've tried a solution with 1 horse and it may or may not have worked, doesn't mean it's going to work or not work on another horse. You have to try every horse. So in regards to mares coming in and out of season, there are supplements available. I know there's herbal remedies that you can give them, and I know that there is an injection available as well which stops them cycling. I'm not saying, I'm trying to give you all the solutions. I'm not saying to go out and do this, and I'm not saying that I endorse it. What I'm trying to say is what's available to you guys. So I'm not necessarily here saying run out and get the mare injection and inject all your mares to stop them cycling. I'm not saying I endorse that at all, but what I'm saying is that there are products on the market available to help with mares depending on how bad they are. And then of course there's just simple training as well. The more trained your horse is, or the more responsive, that's the word I'm looking for, the more responsive your horse is to training, then the better off you're going to be. I've got 3 mares out of my 4 that I take to clinics. I've got 3 mares and 1 gelding. So I experience mares all the time, and I don't inject any of mine. We just go out on the road and we do our thing, and they all seem to cope pretty well. So the next cause of a change in behavior that I want to talk about is the change of the season. So changing, Hillary's saying my mares are great, I have a moody gelding, and I'm about to talk about that right now. So changes of season is something that we need to consider, and obviously spring is breeding season, and even your geldings can be affected by changes in season. So a significant one that we know about is spring, but there's other changes in the season that would have an effect on your horses. Even the full moon can have an effect on your horses, and geldings can be just as susceptible to these things as mares. A lot of geldings are great. They're the same horse every single day, but I know that my geldings, or a couple of our geldings within our whole herd, can be what we call quite colty or quite studdy. So they behave like stallions often, even though that they're geldings. And so geldings can very much be, can be affected by changes in season and the things that we're talking about today. So we've got breeding season. A change of season can bring cold, it can bring new pasture, and it can bring new dietary requirements. So even though most of us know as horse owners that, you know, it might be cold one morning and we'll go, oh, the horses are a little frisky because it's cold, we understand that on a base level. But what the cold also does is it brings in a change of dietary requirements, because now our horses are using their fat stores and their energy to keep warm. So depending on where you live in the world, here on the east coast of Australia, we don't have a terrible amount to worry about, but we do need to be aware of changes in season that physiologically are going to have an effect on our horses. The next one that I'm going to talk about, change in season, there's nothing you can do about it. The season's going to change, but it is something that you can just acknowledge and go, okay, well, the season changed a week ago, so let's give it a week. Let's just continue training and see if it settles down after the change of season. You might see a change of behavior for 1 or 2 days and think, oh, there's something going on with my horse. If you just note it and don't do anything about it, then in a week it might be gone, because it might have just been a change in the season, or like I said, the full moon or something like that could be going on. The next thing that I want to talk about is pain, the pain factor. So changes of behaviour can come about if your horse is in pain. You know yourself, if you're in pain, you're going to have a change in behaviour, whether that makes you go quiet or whether it makes you a bit grumpy or whether it makes you whatever. I know that pain tends to make me a little bit grumpy, so we need to acknowledge that that's something that can happen for the horse as well. If you're in pain constantly and then you've just got this nagging ache all the time, that can make you a little bit grumpy. So pain is definitely something that we need to consider. The opposite side of the coin of that is that I have actually seen a few people with horses that were quiet when they purchased them or when they first acquired them, or they've been quiet, and now the person has started getting maybe massage or a bit of therapy or a bit of chiropractic work, or maybe the vet's been out for something, and all of a sudden there's been a change in behavior, and oh, my horse is now a bit spooky or a little bit flighty or a little bit high energy. Well, we might consider that to be a negative, but sometimes it can be a reflection on, well, when my horse was quiet, he might have been in a bit of pain that made him remain quiet. Maybe he wanted to be reactive, but he thought, well, I can't move that quickly because I know it's going to hurt, so he was a little bit shut down. So sometimes when you have a change in behavior, it can actually be a positive reflection on a pain going away. So pain is something that you need to look into if you see a sudden change of behavior with your horse. That's definitely something that, you know, we as all horse owners, we need to investigate. That brings me to health. So health is exactly the same. Again, I've seen people get horses that are quiet when they first buy them, and then they start, you know, feeding them on their feeding plan, and they might put them in a really good paddock or whatever, and the horse starts to feel good from the inside out, and all of a sudden the horse isn't as quiet as they were. And the human often feels that this is a negative thing, because they say, oh, he was so quiet when I bought him, and now he's jumping out of his skin. And I sort of say, well, maybe you've just made him feel a bit better. Maybe you've just made him feel healthier within himself, so now he's able to use a bit of that energy. So you need to consider whether it's excess energy and negative behavior, or whether, you know, was he dull? Was he quiet or was he dull? Was he quiet or was he flat? Was he quiet or was he just didn't have enough energy to do it? That's what you need to consider, especially when you've got a new horse coming into your home and he might be quiet. Recovery can be the same thing. So if you've had a horse that's been in ill health, recovery can take a long time for a horse. You know yourself that if you've had quite a significant illness, sometimes the doctor might go, yep, you've got the all clear, you're fine. And you think, oh man, but I'm still tired and I'm still lethargic and this and that. Well, our horses feel the same way. Even though the illness might be gone, it's going to take a little while for the horse to get back up to optimum health. So under that pain and that health, what I want to talk about is another example. I do meet a few people that might have bought horses where the horse has been quiet and now the horse isn't quiet anymore. So, and when I start to talk to them, I say, well, where did the horse come from? And they'll say, oh, the horse was with a trainer and then I bought the horse. And I'll say, okay, the horse was with a trainer. Most trainers are training 5 to 7 days a week on those horses. So that horse is being ridden 5 to 7 times a week. How often are you riding the horse? And they'll say 3 times a week. I'll say, well, there you go. If the horse is being ridden 5 to 7 times a week, that's going to keep him fairly disciplined, fairly quiet, not in a negative way, but just in a logical way or a practical way, if I'm training every single day, you know, if I was running every single day, I might be fit and I might be healthy, but I'm probably not, you know, after a run, I'm not sort of coming home and fidgeting or tapping my feet and things like that. I don't have excess energy to burn. Whereas you take an athlete, a horse that's been ridden like an athlete 5 to 7 days a week, and then you go ahead and put him in the semi-retirement paddock where he's only getting ridden 3 days a week, certainly the behavioural issues can start to come up because he's been fit and healthy and now he's just being ridden mildly. So he sort of feels like, well, I still feel like an athlete. What am I going to do with all this excess energy? So that's something that does come under that diet, exercise, energy input, energy output, but it comes under that pain and health sort of banner as well. Not necessarily pain and not necessarily ill health, but certainly a change in, patterns, so to speak. It doesn't necessarily mean the horse is a bad horse, but it means that you've changed what the horse has been doing. You know, like I say, you ride a horse 5 to 7 days a week. I've been doing it, you know, my horse has been in training now, Boogie. I've been taking her out on trails. I've only taken her out on trails for the last 3 days. She prior to that, she was in the paddock for a week, maybe a week without being ridden. On the first day, she was pretty excitable. She was pretty like, yeah, let's go out on this trail ride. I'm going to smash it. And now day 3 today, she's a little bit like, yeah, maybe I'll just conserve my energy. Maybe I'll just make sure that we're only going this far or that far. Because on day 1, she sort of didn't think about how far we might be going. She kind of went, yes, we're going out, we're doing something. And she was all excited about that. So it made her a bit, you know, a bit hot, okay? But now on day 3, already she's starting to temper that. So that's something to consider if you've got a horse that's recently joined you and it's got new behavioural issues, like when I rode it at the owner's, it was perfect and now it's not. Are you doing what the owner was doing? Has it still got the same workload? The final thing that I want to talk about tonight is the possibility that something unknown has happened to the horse. And caused it to become a little bit jumpy. So I'm going to share with you something that's happened only in the last week here to our horses, and I'm going to give you the abbreviated version. Basically, I came home the other week and one of our horses was on the wrong side of a 5-strand barbed wire fence. His rug was all cut up to smithereens, but thankfully he had a few cuts on him, but he had cleared the fence. I don't know how. He must have a jumping career somewhere in there. He had cleared the fence, given himself a few nicks, and all over his body. He had them up on his neck and on all 4 legs, on his wither, on his chest. So he had sort of tumbled over the entire fence. Then the following night, I was out feeding the horses and I heard a strange buzzing sound in my backyard, and I looked up and someone had a drone flying over my property. And the reason I looked up was that as I was feeding out my horses, I could see that they were sort of a little bit tense. They were, jiggy jogging, beyond what would have been normal. And then of course, when I sort of went, what's going on with you guys? Because it was actually dark. I was out there with a torch. When I sort of went, what's going on with you guys? I tuned in to the sound and I went, hang on a minute, that's a strange sound. I don't know what that is. Looked up and there was a drone. On further investigation, it turned out that the day before, at approximately the time when the horse went over the fence, the drone had been being flown. So both of these horses are now exhibiting jumpy signs. So one of them, the one that went through the fence, has been on rest and being medicated, obviously, because he's went through a fence. And the other one is my horse Boogie, who's in my backyard and who I've been taking on the trails. And what I've noticed is that on the trail, she's quite jumpy about things behind her. Okay, so she has actually spooked a few times out on the trail with me, which is completely uncharacteristic behavior. I bred the horse. She's been with me since the day she was born. And I know I have taken that horse on kilometers and kilometers of rides. Her 17th ride under saddle was a 20k endurance ride with 40 other horses. She is not typically a spooky horse. She's a very calm, responsive, respectful horse. But in the last 3 days since this incident has happened, she has been jumpy and she's sort of been looking up, and certainly when there's any sudden kind of movements, she's starting to look back and look up and around behind her. So I know that the drone was here. So I know that those horses experienced something. I can't prove that, and that's a whole nother story. I can't prove that that's what sent the horse over the fence. But what I do know is that those horses, the two of them, because they were in the paddock together, I do know that those two horses have experienced something that scared them and scared one of them enough for him to go over a fence. And this is a 12-year-old horse that's, again, another, quiet horse, doesn't spook, isn't, I've got a warm blood down the paddock that if she jumped over a fence, I'd be like, yeah, okay, she's typically spooky. She's only been here for 6 months. She's a completely different kettle of fish. But both of these horses are typically quiet. They're typically fine. They're very level-headed horses, but something has scared them. I think I know what it is. But that's something to consider when you're talking about your horse's changes of behaviour. We don't know what happens. Lisa, we had wild dogs recently. Now the horse is very nervy about bushes and trails. Absolutely. So we don't get wild dogs up where we are because we're really close to town. But for my girlfriend's place just down the road borders onto the river, and we have seen wild dogs in her paddock. So whilst we think, oh, we've got, they've got these nice little paddocks and they're all safe and secure, we don't know that there's not wild dogs. We don't know that, neighbours or people in the community aren't doing things like flying drones or, we were at the showground the other week and there was a guy there with a chopper, a helicopter, a little remote control helicopter that was noisy as anything. You just don't know what your horses see when you're not there. And even domestic dogs, if your neighbours have domestic dogs, might run at the fence or bark at them and all that sort of stuff. I don't want to open like this whole can of worms, but what I am saying is that you need to pay attention to your horses, and your horses will be telling you, hey, something happened in the last 24 hours because we're not okay. They're going to be a little bit jumpy. They're going to be a little bit wild-eyed. And that's something that we need to consider and go, okay, I don't know what's happened, but something has happened. It's quite possible that something's happened to scare them. Abby's saying hot air balloons. So an unknown factor is something that we definitely need to consider. Now, the solution for the unknown is just rebuilding confidence. So I've been taking Boogie out and I've been, Hillary's saying kites. You just don't know what people, have got. I know, Hillary, we've been at your place and there's been peacocks flying around, You just don't know what's happened with your horses, when they've been alone, because they're alone oftentimes. Even when they're in your backyard, you don't actually know what's happening 100% of the time, most of the time. So it's just something to consider and something to observe. And we do need to take on board that it's real for them. While we might say, oh, it's, it was just the neighbour's dog, or it was just the neighbour's cat, something as simple as a cat walking through the paddock, or, could make the horse go, whoa, I've never seen a cat before. And then they're a little bit jumpy from that point forward. What's important is how we deal with that. So it just goes back to rebuilding a bit of confidence, maybe spending a bit of time on the ground and doing something that the horse finds confident. So without going too far into, I hope I didn't go too deep into any of those things. I'm just going to recap on the 8 things that we spoke about tonight. And as I said, there is an information sheet available for those of you that want it. Please inbox me. A pig, Hillary. Yes, I know you pig. Comes through the paddock as well. So number 1 was diet. Changes in diet. It could be just the pasture, new pasture coming in with a change of season. It might be additives. It might be new feed that you've introduced. Who knows? Exercise, energy in versus energy out. So I like to adjust the feed for the workload. So when I've ridden my horses, I like to give them a reasonable feed. When I know that I'm not going to ride that day, they get a smaller feed. Changes in the herd. Is your horse now alone? Is there a new horse in the paddock? Has there been an introduction? You know, that sort of thing. Mares, changes of behavior. Are they in season? Are they coming out of season? Are they, you know, have they got their mind on one thing and one thing only? Which geldings can be a little bit like that as well. And obviously stallions can be a little bit like that as well. Changes in the season. Changes in season can bring changes in temperature. It can bring changes in pasture. It can bring new dietary requirements, any of the above. Pain. Pain will cause your horse to change his behavior. So that's something that needs to be investigated. Ill health will cause your horse to change his behavior, both negatively. Obviously, if your horse is sick, he might be a little bit flatter, he might have a change in behavior. But if your horse was unwell for a long period of time, and all of a sudden he gets well, that could cause a change of behavior because all of a sudden he feels really great, which can be a positive thing. Sometimes it can be a little surprising when we've bought what we think is a, you know, quiet, old, you know, walk about the paddock horse, and then all of a sudden we're feeding him correctly and he goes, woohoo, I've got a newfound sense of being a 2-year-old. So that was health. And then the final thing was the unknown factor. So if you turn up to the paddock and all of a sudden, the horses are jumpy and they've got wide eyes and that sort of thing, it's something you need to take into consideration that there might have been an unknown stimulus or an unknown threat to the herd, which can cause the horses to have a change in behavior. I'm into day 4 now, I think, with Boogie, with her jumpiness, and even though she's getting better every day, she was still a little jumpy today. It can take them a few days to get over, what scared them, because obviously, especially when it's something that they can't process, like a drone or a wild dog. Wild dogs are going to cause them to go, okay, we're not safe because there's a threat of wild dogs. Something like a drone is going to cause them to go, we don't even know what that is. Where did that come from? I'm afraid. They can't even process it, if that makes sense. So thank you very much for joining me once again for the Monday Night Live show. I hope that you got some tips and some solutions for dealing with changes in your horse's behavior. And as I said at the start, there are lots of different reasons that our horses can change their behavior, but those 8 that I've shared with you tonight are probably the most significant ones that I see, or the most common ones that I see. If you would like an information sheet, please send me a private message and I will make sure that I send it over to you. And make sure, if you're new tonight, that you go ahead and follow Tanja Kraus Horsemanship on Facebook. You're welcome, Greta. Follow Tanja Kraus Horsemanship on Facebook. And if you go to the business page, the Tanja Kraus Horsemanship page, you're welcome, Hillary. You can go ahead and click on that follow button. You're welcome, Haley. You can click on the follow button and select see first. Don't worry, it will make it will just make sure that you see all the Tanja Kraus Horsemanship posts, which I try not to do. I try not to waste your time on posts. I tend to try and share resources and information. You're welcome, Gwenda. Monday nights we do the live show. Wednesday nights we do, Wednesdays we send out a newsletter, and Fridays we always release a new YouTube video. So I am trying to get resources out there at least 3 times a week for you guys. So if you choose to follow the page, that'll make sure that you get that information all the time. You're welcome, Sandra. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you. The website is horsemanshipforperformance.com. And we do have an active YouTube channel. You're welcome, Lisa. We do have an active YouTube channel, which is It's Tanja Kraus. But if you search Tanja Kraus Horsemanship, it should also come up as well. The clinics are listed. I get asked quite a lot. You're welcome, Katie. I get asked a lot about where I am on my clinics. I travel around the world teaching. So if you would like to know when I'm in your area next, go ahead and go to the events page on my Facebook page. You're welcome, Tangel, and you'll see a list of the clinics there. And if there's a particular topic that you would like to hear me talk about on the Monday Night Live show, go ahead and send it to me. No topic too big or too small, please send them through. You're welcome, Susan. I have got the topic for next week already because I was contacted last night or the night before by someone. So next week's topic is accidents, riding accidents, and the 15 ways that we can try and prevent horse riding accidents. Okay, so that's the topic for next Monday night's live, which I'm really excited to share with you. And I've already been prepping for that one this week, so it should be a really good one. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope everyone has a great week with your horses, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Good night.